Hello there, I'm Jon Kirkman. I'm a journalist and broadcaster in the UK, and I've basically been making these films to remind you of some of the things you may have missed while we've all been in lockdown. And in terms of what I'm reminding you of, it's all musically related because that's the field in which I work. Today, I'm going to be talking about some of the books that I really think you should check out. Now let's start with this one. This is a fantastic book if you're into progressive rock music. It's the Strawberry Bricks Guide to Progressive Rock. It's the third edition of the book in a suitably psychedelic and progressive sleeve there. It's written by a guy called Charles Snyder. Now I have to say, oh no, this is going to be boring. It's not. It's beautifully written. Some of the things, just to give you an idea, two of the artists in here, and there's many, many, many of them. Robert Wyatt, Rock Bottom. That was Robert Wyatt's debut solo album, I think, after he'd had his accident. And it's a great record as well. And basically what you get is the appraisal, the information about the album. Another one would be Robert Calvert, Captain Lockheed. There's so many books in here. There's no pictures, believe me. But it's still a fascinating read. Never boring. It's hugely interesting to sort of find out what is actually in this book in terms of artists, and then you look up the favourite sort of artist and your favourite album, see if it's in there. But the writing is really spot on. It's always very engaging, tells you a lot about these bands and the artists and the albums that they made. Here's another great one here. Here we go, Gong, Flying Teapot. Now that was, I suppose, probably one of the first Gong albums many people got. It's certainly the first album that Gong released on the Virgin label. They've made a few albums before that, but it's actually got some great information about the album and about the band on there. And here's another one right after that, Kran. Now they were a German band, and again, lots of great information about the band and the albums. There's some bands in here you will have heard of. An artist like Mike Oldfield, you've definitely heard of Mike Oldfield, and then there's bands like maybe Kran, or other bands that you probably haven't heard of at all. There's another one you will have heard of, Curved Air, and that was for their album Air Cut, which I think was their fourth album actually. And Kingdom Come, not the American rock band. We're talking about the band with Arthur Brown here, and that's a great record. It's called Journey. I think it came out about 1972, 73. So that book, it's very weighty as well. I always love heavy books because it means it's a really good read. Got lots of information. So if you're a fan of progressive rock music, I highly recommend this book. It's a very, very entertaining read. Keep you engaged for hours and hours, which right now is pretty much what we want. Now, if you want a lighter side, Eric Bell. Now, Eric Bell, as you will know, or maybe not know, was founder member of Thin Lizzy. And he's the guitarist who plays on their very first hit single, Whiskey in the Jar. He made 3 albums with Thin Lizzy. He decided it wasn't for him. He decided to leave the band. And then he took up with former Jimi Hendrix bass player Noel Redding and was in the Noel Redding band for 2 albums, Blow In and Clonakilty Cowboys. And then he embarked on his solo career. It's all told by Eric, and it's incredibly amusing how he started off working with the show bands and also working with other bands as well. There is the artist as a young boy. And he's a lovely guy, and we're going to be interviewing Eric in the coming weeks. You will find that particular interview on the SoundCloud page that we have for Classic Rock Radio. But there you go, that's one of the early promos I remember. For Thin Lizzy, there's Phil Lynott in the middle there. That's Brian Downey. Of course, there's Eric Bell. They were an amazing band. If you never saw Thin Lizzy with Eric Bell as a member, you missed out because they were really, really good little band, I have to say. And there we are, all hair and beard. Back in the day. I have spoken to Eric in the past. He's a lovely guy, and I'm looking forward to talking to him about this particular book. It's a fabulous book. It's a fabulous read. Yeah, Thin Lizzy are in there, of course, so it was a big part of his life. And also an interesting sort of few years with Noel Redding's band as well. So that's another one, highly recommended. Now, Fleetwood Mac, Tusk. You recognise that, don't you? That was the cover for Tusk. But the album was the follow-up to Rumours. It didn't do as well as the record company expected. But I think artistically it was a really, really good album. I think the band are quite rightly proud of it. It was a double album at the time, but this book, Get Tusked, and it's basically, there's photos in here and you see all the guys and the crew and the engineering crew and the production crew wearing t-shirts with Get Tusked on it, and the band as well. It's written by Ken Kalert and also Herman Rojas, or Rojas, depending on the pronunciation. Ken was an engineer both on Rumours and on the live Fleetwood Mac album, and of course the Tusk album. He'd worked for years. He worked with people like Donovan and also worked with people like Billy Idol. He's very, very, very good reputation in the business. Great engineer. He even won a Grammy for his work on Rumours. So he's a great guy. But these are his memories of working on the Tusk album, which it's always ridiculously hard to reproduce something that was so successful again. So Fleetwood Mac decided not to do that, and they made something totally different, which really put them out on a limb at the time. And you get to hear all about how the album was put together, how it started, because they started recording Tusk in 1978, and it was about a year or so after Rumours came out. But it's a really good read, and I have to say there's some really funny moments in there, some very funny rock and roll moments in there as well, but it's a really honest appraisal of what was going on at the time. And of course these books are always interesting to fans of music because they want to see, if you like, behind the curtain. They want to know what was going on behind the scenes when a hit album like this was being recorded. And Ken's story is certainly one that I found hugely entertaining, and it was a great read as well. I really enjoyed reading that. In fact, all the books that I'm mentioning today, I've enjoyed reading all of them because that's why I'm helping to promote them. Now here's another one very close to my heart. I've worked with Yes many, many times over the years. This is a biography that I've been waiting for a long, long time. And it's called All My Yesterdays. It is, of course, by Steve Howe, as you can tell. There he is with Mr. Gibson, as it was known, because he used to buy us an air ticket and put the seat next to him. He'd have the guitar in the seat as Mr. Gibson. That's how much he cares about that guitar. He didn't want it going in the hold because, of course, it's pressurised and it's cold, and he didn't want it to affect the guitar. So here's a man who loves guitars and also loves playing live. And incidentally, as an aside, he has a wonderful solo album out in the next month called Love Is, and it's a wonderful, wonderful album. Probably one of the best albums he's made, I have to say. But this book, this goes all the way, right the way back to his early career and his parents. And his parents were actually in the food industry. There was, I think his father was a chef. And that's something that Steve considered doing at one point until, I guess, the rock and roll bug hit him. And he was in a band called the Syndicate, and I think they held the record for having the most Chuck Berry songs in their set at one point. I think they could play something over 100 Chuck Berry songs, so you can see where Steve's roots were. And of course, a lot of the people who know Steve Howe known for his work with the progressive rock band Yes, and there's a lot in there about Yes as well, but also some of the other bands he's played with, like GTR and Asia. And he talks about his solo albums as well, and some of the bands he was in pre-Yes, including Tomorrow, who were a very, very famous psychedelic band and had a big hit with My White Bicycle. So that's Steve Howe's biography. It tells you all the sorts of things about jamming with Jimi Hendrix and everything. I mean, if you're into guitars, this is a book you want to read about, because he talks a lot about guitars as well. He also talks about the first time when he first bought this particular guitar and the reasons why he bought the guitar. And again, there's an interview on the SoundCloud page where you can hear Steve talking to me about the book and about his life. And it's highly illuminating, believe me. Now, here's another great book. This colour may look familiar to you. If you're a rock fan, if you go back to your collection, look for any of the records that were on Island Records. This was the colour pink that Island Records label was on. It's a very, very famous label. Well, why am I holding this book up? Well, it's written by a guy called Richard Digby Smith. It's called 1, 2, 3, 4. Richard was actually an engineer at Basing Street Studios. Now, there were a lot of studios in the 60s and 70s that were very, very famous. The most famous probably would be, in this country, Abbey Road, followed by Olympic. Then there'd be places like Advision and Trident. and then Basing Street Studios was certainly in there with them. So many artists recorded in Basing Street Studios, and just a few would be Led Zeppelin. They recorded Led Zeppelin 4 in Basing Street Studios. Also, Jethro Tull, at the same time as Led Zeppelin 4 was being recorded Aqualung in there. And the band Free did a lot of recording in there. There's a nice little story. I'm not going to give too much away because I'm going to be interviewing Richard in the next week or so, and he'll probably bring up this story. But you may remember the album Heartbreaker by Free. It was the last album they made, and the band was so happy with the work that Richard did on the album, they actually gave him a point, what they call points, in other words, royalties on the album. They gave him an advance. And with that advance, he was able to buy one of the very first multi-track reel-to-reel machines, portable reel-to-reel machines, and these were very, very expensive machines back in 1972. And Richard had one and started and embarked on a kind of songwriting and composing sort of thing there as well with that. But it's all in this book. All the artists are in there. On the back, Jimmy Page talks about his work there and work with Richard. As he said, when Led Zeppelin were in Basing Street, Richard was behind the desk a lot of the time. So there's some great stories in here. It's not actually in any chronicle order because it's just stories that come up. And of course, since those days, a lot of the paperwork from sessions has been lost. I know it sounds crazy, but then, when record companies lose master tapes in a fire and they don't have any backups of them, these things happen, sadly. It's dreadful. It's almost, for me, cultural vandalism. But anyway, he's got a great memory, and he talks very eloquently and articulately about a lot of the things that happened. And I was very, very interested to hear about his work with Kossoff, Kirk, Tetsu and Rabbit, and Free, of course, and Paul Kossoff. So that's one of the reasons why I've got this book. I'm looking forward to speaking to Richard. He worked for a while in America as well. Again, that's all in this book. And it's pretty much a really good document of the times in which Richard was working at Basing Street Studios. Of course, a little later, Basing Street, or Island Studios as it was known, I went there for a job. I didn't get it, but I did go there. I actually went for a job at Apple Studios, and I got the job, and the studio closed down 3 weeks later, so I lost the job. So the guy suggested I try Island, and I said, well, I've already tried at Island. He said, try again, say you got the job here. And I got an interview, so I went down to Basing Street. I didn't get the job in the end, but it was a fascinating place, and later it was bought by Trevor Horn and renamed Psalm Studios, and it was called Psalm East. And another very famous record that was recorded there in the 80s was, of course, the Band-Aid record, Do They Know It's Christmas? But this book is basically all about Richard's time as a staff engineer at Basing Street Studios, also known as the Island Studios, in the late 60s and early 70s. And I think you'll enjoy reading all about that. Again, it's another glimpse behind the curtain, which I know music fans always love to see and appreciate and hear about. Now here's another new book. It's a rather nice book. It's called Led Zeppelin, The Day I Was There. And now it's written by fans, and it's a limited edition. There's a number there, and it's signed by the author. What you get in here is basically fan memories of the time they saw Led Zeppelin, and the names, some of the pictures of the people who are in there. Again, another fascinating read, because everybody has their own view on what a band was like when they saw them. And I know that from my point of view. I remember seeing concerts that I thought were great, and other people thought weren't so great, and vice versa. So it's a really nice personalised view, and it's not a professional view of how Led Zeppelin are, because when you write about bands, and I know from a professional point of view, there are certain things and boxes you have to tick, and you have to do it a certain way. These really are beautifully written and absolutely passionate accounts of what it was like for people to actually see Led Zeppelin, the day they went to see Led Zeppelin. And as such, it's a fascinating read. And I think if you're a Led Zeppelin fan, it's always good to start a debate as well, because you can say, oh, I don't agree with that. I was at that gig and I disagree. But you have to remember, everybody has their own view of something. And you can never be definitive about anything when you go and see anything. It's one of those things where everybody's account is important, and more often than not is different. So anyway, there's a whole selection of books for you that you may have missed during lockdown. I hope you check some of these out, because these really are fabulous books, and they cover lots of different styles, from rock to progressive rock here to West Coast AOR rock, and sort of a nice little industry thing about lots of different bands. And also, like I said, you know, Jethro Tull, Led Zeppelin, Free, and Bob Marley and the Wailers, of course, who were very big acts on Island Records, as well as recording in Basing Street. So there you are. That is something you may have missed. Welcome to the book club. And I hope you really enjoy those books if you check them out. I'm sure you will. They really are great reads. And of course, with nothing else for a lot of us to do still, for another month or so at least, these will fill the time for you rather nicely. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm sure I'll be back very soon with something else that you may have missed. In the meantime, thanks for watching this presentation.